When I think back to 2016, I can't believe how a simple message on a dating site turned into the most catastrophic financial disaster of my entire life. I never saw myself as the kind of man who would lose $500,000 to someone I thought loved me. I was cautious, methodical, always the one who read the fine print and double-checked everything. But it turns out even the most careful people can get swept into something they don't understand. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't even lonely in the traditional sense. But I had $500,000 saved up from selling my house in Red Deer and cashing out my pension early, and I thought that would be enough to give me the retirement I dreamed about after 37 years of climbing telephone poles in Canadian winters. I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted to build something real with me. I was wrong about everything. I was 62 when I sold my house in Red Deer. I'd spent the better part of 4 decades in that same city just working for the telecom company, coming home to an empty house and wondering if this was all life had to offer. I felt like I was pretty boring, really. My ex-wife used to say I had no imagination, and maybe she was right. I had $500,000 saved up. It wasn't a fortune by Canadian standards, but I felt optimistic about the future for the first time in years. I'd sold my house for $285,000, which wasn't much considering what I'd put into it. But the market in Red Deer wasn't great at the time. I'd also cashed out my pension early, taking a hit on the total amount, but walking away with $215,000 in my account. The plan was simple: take that money somewhere it would last longer, somewhere I could actually enjoy retirement instead of just surviving it. I got married back in 1982. We went on to have 2 kids. It was fine for a while, but by the mid-90s, things had completely fallen apart. She wanted the house, the car, half of everything I'd worked for, and she got most of it in the divorce. It was nasty. We barely spoke after the papers were signed. By the time 2015 came around, I was 61 and completely worn out from just existing in that cold, empty routine. I'd heard people talk about the Philippines, how the cost of living was lower, how life could be easier, and how a man could start fresh without being judged for his age or his bank account. I let myself believe it because I wanted something like that to be true so badly. I'd never been there before, never even thought about Southeast Asia until a buddy from work mentioned he'd been going to Thailand every winter for years. He said the Philippines was even better, friendlier people, English everywhere, and women who actually appreciated older men instead of treating them like they were invisible. By the time I turned 62 inches, early 2016, I started thinking, why was I even staying in Red Deer? I could retire early. I had enough saved. I had nothing waiting for me in Canada except more cold winters and more loneliness. I could live in the Philippines on the money I had. I could have a nice place, a nice girlfriend, and I could be respected for once instead of just being another divorced guy nobody noticed. So I made the decision. I was going to move to the Philippines, find someone to share my life with, and finally live the way I'd always imagined retirement should be. I joined a dating site called Filipino Cupid in March of 2016. I forgot the exact name at first, but it was clear that there were more girls on there than guys, and it was quite interesting to receive messages from girls in their early 20s saying they wanted a serious relationship with someone just like me. I wasn't naive. I understood they came from poor backgrounds and needed financial support. I got that they wanted a better life, but I wanted a better life as well. And by being with someone like that, I thought I would finally have the companionship I'd been missing for so long. Before long, I started talking to one girl who was from Manila but had recently moved to Cebu for work. Her name was Tesselin. She was only 24 years old, but it was as if she completely looked past my age and appearance and looked at who I was inside as a person. She worked at a call center doing customer service for an Australian telecommunications company, which I thought was a funny coincidence since I'd worked in telecom my whole life. She said she made about 18,000 pesos a month, which was around $450 Canadian, and she was supporting her mother and younger sister back in Manila. We talked every single day for 3 months. She'd message me during her lunch breaks, and we'd video call every evening after her shift ended. She was beautiful, long, dark hair, a sweet smile, and this way of laughing that made me feel like I was actually funny for once in my life. She told me about her dreams of finishing college someday, about how hard life was in the Philippines and how she wished she could give her family a better life. She never directly asked me for money in those early conversations, which made me trust her even more. It only took me 4 months to decide to go and see her. I booked a flight to Cebu for July 2016, and I remember sitting on that plane thinking this was either the smartest or the stupidest thing I'd ever done. I chose to believe it was smart. When I called my daughter and told her I'd met someone online and she was actually younger than her by a few years, I could hear her sigh as if to say, "Here we go, Dad." She asked me if I was sure I knew what I was doing, if I'd thought this through, if I understood that women in poor countries sometimes had different motivations. I told her I appreciated her concern, but I was a grown man and I could handle myself. But the truth is, her skepticism bothered me more than I wanted to admit. When we met in person for the first time at Ayala Center in Cebu, I was 62 and she was 24. I'll admit there was an age gap, 38 years to be exact, but she said she didn't care. She said age was just a number and that she valued stability and kindness over anything else. In a way, I felt like she was the more experienced of the two of us. She seemed to know exactly what she wanted, exactly how to make me feel comfortable, and exactly what to say to make me believe this was real. Part of me knew what the game was in the Philippines. I'd read the forums, heard the stories from other expats, and part of me had already come to the conclusion that she probably wanted something from me. But I chose to ignore it because the alternative, going back to Red Deer alone, felt worse than taking the risk. I told myself that as long as I was careful, as long as I kept control of my finances, everything would be fine. I was wrong. For the first 2 weeks, everything was incredible. We met for coffee every morning before her shift, walked around the Cebu IT park in the evenings, and spent weekends at the beach in Mactan. I found myself opening up to her more than I'd expected. She listened when I talked about my ex-wife, about my kids who barely called anymore, about how invisible I'd felt for the past decade. She made me feel seen. After dating for just 3 weeks, that's when we decided to take things further. She was renting a small studio apartment in Mabolo, about 20 minutes from her call center, and she said she was struggling to afford the rent on her salary. It was 8,000 pesos, a month about $200 Canadian, and she was traveling over an hour each way on jeepneys to save money. I suggested she move in with me. I'd already rented a 1-bedroom condo in La Hug for the duration of my stay, and it made sense for us to be together. She agreed immediately. She was working at the call center and making around 18,000 pesos a month, which was barely $450 Canadian. She mentioned that she was sending 5,000 pesos back to her mother in Manila every month to help support her younger sister who was still in high school. I agreed to send $250 a month directly to her mother so Tesselin could keep more of her salary for herself. I felt like this was a fair amount and it wasn't going to break my budget. It was the right thing to do if I was serious about her. I was happy to make those changes because a part of me had always been looking for a connection, someone to go home to in the evenings. We'd cook dinner together, she taught me how to make adobo and sinigang, and we'd watch Filipino soap operas that I didn't understand but pretended to enjoy. She was affectionate, attentive, and always smiling. She'd hold my hand in public, introduce me to her coworkers, and talk about our future together like it was a certainty. After we had been together for 6 months and lived together for 5, I had to pull the trigger and ask her to marry me. I wanted to take things further with her and I felt like she would want the same, which she did. I bought a simple ring from a jewelry shop in Ayala and proposed to her at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. She cried and said yes, and we decided to get married quickly so I could sponsor her for a visa eventually. We got married at the Cebu City Hall in January 2017. Both excited about building a life together. After things went smoothly for about 4 months after the wedding, it only seemed logical to look for a condo we could actually own instead of renting. I wasn't about to rush into things though. First things first, let's just buy 1 unit and see how it goes. Tesselin had been researching condos in Cebu City, particularly in the Cebu Business Park area near Ayala. She showed me listings for units in buildings like Calix Residences and Solinia. After looking around for about a month, I settled on 1 unit in a building called the Persimmon Studios. It was a 2.8 square meter studio on the 18th floor with a view of the city. I looked at similar units being rented out on property websites, checked the occupancy rates, and researched rental yields. And after all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price at 3.2 million pesos, about $80,000 Canadian, and we should be able to rent it out and make a return of around 6 to 7% annually. I sold $80,000 worth of my GICs back in Canada and wired the money to the developer. I purchased that first condo in April 2017, and the plan was to rent it out as soon as the building was completed in late 2018. The developer required a 20% down payment immediately, with the rest paid in installments over 18 months until turnover. I paid the down payment of $16,000 and set up the monthly installments. It felt like a smart investment. Property values in Cebu were rising, and everyone I talked to said condos in the business park area were a sure thing. After about 6 months went smoothly, Tesselin started talking about buying another property. She'd found a unit in a different building, this one in IT Park, closer to where she worked. It was slightly bigger, 32 square meters, and priced at 3.8 million pesos, about $95,000 Canadian. I looked into it, and it seemed like an equally good investment. The problem was, the foreign quota for that building had already been filled. In the Philippines, only 40% of units in a condo building can be owned by foreigners. If that quota is filled, foreigners can't buy anymore. I should have thought about looking for somewhere else, but my wife said, "Buy it in my name." She said it made sense because we were married, and legally what was hers was mine anyway. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I did. I wired another $95,000 in September 2017, and we bought the second condo. This one was in Tesselin's name entirely. At the time, I convinced myself it was fine. We were married. We were building a future together. What could go wrong? By mid-2018? We were living in Cebu full-time. I'd applied for a retirement visa, and Tesselin had quit her call center job because I was supporting us financially. She said she wanted to focus on managing our properties and maybe starting a small business eventually. I thought it made sense. Why should she work for $450 a month when we had rental income coming in? But then the requests started. 6 months after we bought the second condo, Tesselin said her mother was sick and needed surgery. She said it was urgent, something about gallstones, and the public hospital had a 6-month waiting list. If we wanted her to get treated quickly, we'd have to pay for a private hospital. The cost was 120,000 pesos, about $3,000 Canadian. I hesitated at first, but Tesselin was crying, saying her mother was in pain and might die if we didn't help. I swallowed my pride and sent the money. 2 months later, her younger sister needed tuition money for college, another 60,000 pesos, about $1,500 Canadian. Then there was a problem with the family house in Manila. The roof was leaking and needed repairs, another 80,000 pesos, $2,000 Canadian. Every time, Tesselin would come to me with tears in her eyes, explaining how desperate the situation was, how her family had no one else to turn to, and how she'd do the same for my family if they needed help. I didn't send the money without resistance. Every time she asked, I'd try to say no, try to explain that we had a budget and we couldn't keep doing this, but she just kept pushing and pushing. She'd give me the silent treatment for days, refuse to sleep in the same bed, and make me feel like I was the selfish one. I couldn't bear the thought of having a miserable woman next to me ruining my life, so eventually I'd give in. Before we were married, Tesselin never asked for anything from me. She was happy and content just being able to go out for coffee and spend weekends together. But when we were married, I could feel like she was more comfortable, but not comfortable in a positive way, comfortable in a negative way, comfortable demanding things, comfortable making me feel guilty if I said no. By the end of 2018, I'd already spent $80,000 on the first condo, $95,000 on the second condo, $250 per month times 18 months equals $4,500 on her mother's support, $15,000 on various family emergencies. Total spent so far, $194,500 $500. I still had about $305,000 left, but I was starting to feel the pressure. My original budget was supposed to be around $2,000 a month for living expenses, but it was creeping closer to $3,500, $4,000 when I included all the extra requests. And no matter how many times I looked at the bank statements, I couldn't explain where it was all going. Then came the biggest request yet. In early 2019, Tesselin said she wanted to build a house for her family in her home province. Not in Manila, where they currently lived, but in Leyte, where her mother's family was originally from. She said her mother had always dreamed of retiring there, near the beach, and it would mean the world to her. The land was cheap, she said, only 500,000 pesos, about $12,500 Canadian, and we could build a simple house for another 2 million pesos, around $50,000. I told her absolutely not. We'd already spent nearly $200,000, and I wasn't about to dump another $60,000 plus into a house I couldn't legally own in a province I'd never even visited. But she was relentless. She brought it up every single day for 2 months. She'd say things like, "When you're gone, I'll need something," which hit me in a way I didn't want to admit. I was nearly 65 at that point, dealing with high blood pressure and bad knees, and she was only 27, still healthy and full of life. She was going to outlive me by decades. What would she have when I was gone? Against everything in me telling me not to, I felt like I had no choice. In April 2019, I sent $65,000 to buy the land and start building the house in Leyte. The land and house were both put in her name because, once again, I legally couldn't own land in the Philippines as a foreigner. Our budget was $65,000 total. For that, we got a 400 square meter plot of land about 2 kilometers from the beach and started building a 3-bedroom house with a small terrace. Tesselin's uncle was going to be the contractor, which should have been another red flag, but I ignored it. By mid-2019, my total spending looked like this. First condo, $80,000. Second condo, $95,000. Lady property land plus house, $65,000. Monthly family support, $7,500 total. By this point, emergency requests, $22,000. Living expenses, $35,000. Total spent, $304,500. Remaining, $195,500. I was starting to panic, but I kept telling myself that once the condos were rented out and generating income, everything would stabilize. It didn't. We lived in Cebu City most of the time, renting a bigger condo in Banalad while we waited for our units to be completed. The routine was comfortable enough: mornings at the local coffee shop, afternoons by the pool, evenings watching TV or going out to dinner. I was starting to enjoy it, or at least I was trying to convince myself I was. Cebu was busy, hot, and chaotic in a way Red Deer never was. The traffic was insane, the pollution was worse, and I could never quite get used to the noise. But when we went to Leyte to check on the house construction, I felt something different. The province was quieter, slower, and the air smelled like salt and rain. Tesselin's family welcomed me warmly, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was all worth it. One thing I noticed very quickly being in the Philippines was how cheap everything was compared to Canada, but also how expensive it became once you factored in all the hidden costs. A meal at a local restaurant was 150 pesos, less than $4. But if you wanted Western food or anything imported, you'd pay Canadian prices or more. Rent was cheap, but electricity wasn't. Labor was cheap, but materials for construction weren't. I tried to learn some Tagalog and Visayan, enough to order food and make small talk, but I was terrible at it. Tesselin's family mostly spoke to me in broken English, and I always felt like I was missing half of what they were saying. I made a few expat friends, mostly older guys in similar situations, but I didn't like hearing their stories because they sounded too much like mine. But underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. The money was draining faster than I'd planned. Tesselin was becoming more demanding, and I was starting to feel like a walking ATM instead of a husband. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. By mid-2019, I'd already spent $304,500. I had $195,500 remaining, which sounds like a lot, but it wasn't when I did the math. My original plan was to live off the interest and rental income, keeping the principal intact, but that plan had gone completely out the window. I told myself $2,000 a month would be enough, but within 6 months of being married, it was closer to $4,000. And no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It wasn't just the big expenses. It was everything. Tesselin's personal expenses, hair salon visits, nails, new clothes, makeup, easily 15,000 pesos a month, $375, family requests, someone's birthday, someone's graduation, someone's medical checkup, another 20,000 pesos a month, $500. Lifestyle creep. We were eating out more, taking weekend trips to Bohol and Siargao, staying in nicer hotels. 30,000 pesos a month, $750. Property expenses. The Leyte house needed more money than budgeted. The condos had association fees, 15,000 pesos a month, $375. I was burning through $2,000 a month, just on extras I'd never planned for. One evening in August 2019, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that our budget was $3,000 a month maximum, and there was no more. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. I showed her the bank statements, showed her the math, showed her that we were on track to run out of money in just a few years if we didn't make changes. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. She said she understood, but her eyes told a different story. Every request after that turned into an argument. Every peso I questioned led to tears or anger, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. She'd say things like, "You don't care about my family," or, "I thought you loved me," and I'd feel this crushing guilt that made me want to just give her whatever she wanted so the fighting would stop. The boundary I tried to set lasted about 3 weeks before it completely fell apart. Things did change after we got married in a way I wasn't expecting. Before the wedding, Tesselin never asked for anything from me. She was sweet, attentive, and never made me feel like I was just a source of money. But after we got married, I could feel like she was more comfortable asking no, demanding things from me. The first real sign that something was wrong came in late 2019. Tesselin went to Manila by herself to visit her family, and this was when I started to wonder if there was something she was hiding from me. Anytime she went anywhere by herself, she usually answered the phone immediately. We had an agreement together that if one of us called the other, we had to pick up straight away. It was her idea. Actually, she said it would make us feel closer even when we were apart. However, when she went to Manila that time, she was very difficult to contact. I'd call her in the morning, no answer. I'd try again in the afternoon, straight to voicemail. When she finally called me back hours later, she'd have an excuse. I was with my family at my aunt's house, and I left my phone in the car. The battery died because there was a brownout and I couldn't charge it. There's no signal in that area. You know how it is. I accidentally put my phone on silent and didn't notice. I tried to brush it off the first time, but then it happened again on her next trip to Manila 2 months later. Same pattern, unreachable for hours, vague excuses, and a defensive tone when I asked where she'd been. At this point, I was definitely sure there was something going on. I didn't want to accuse her of anything because I didn't have proof, but the feeling in my gut was getting harder to ignore. Then there was the money situation. In early 2020, just before COVID hit, Tesselin came to me with another request. Her family wanted to start a small business, a sari-sari store in their neighborhood in Manila. She said it would only cost 150,000 pesos to get started, about $3,750 Canadian, and her mother would run it. She promised it would generate income and eventually pay me back. I said no. I told her we couldn't afford it, that we'd already spent too much, and that I needed to protect what we had left. 2 months later, she asked again. This time, she wanted to buy a second-hand jeepney for 400,000 pesos, about $10,000, that her cousin could drive as a public transport vehicle. She said it would bring in 2,000 pesos a day in revenue, which would be 60,000 pesos a month. She made it sound like a guaranteed return. I said no again, but she kept pushing, every day for weeks. She'd cry, she'd ignore me, she'd bring it up during dinner, during TV time, during sex. She made my life miserable until I gave in. In March 2020, right as the world was shutting down for COVID, I sent her $13,750 combined for both the Sari Sari store and the jeepney. Both were registered in her name because her family would be operating them. I regret agreeing to it more than almost anything else, but at the time, I just wanted her to stop making me feel like the bad guy. By mid-2020, I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. The trust was broken, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was real or if she was just keeping me happy so I'd keep sending money. I hated feeling that way, but I couldn't help it. COVID made everything worse. We were stuck in Cebu under lockdown for months, and the tension between us was suffocating. The condos we'd bought weren't generating any rental income because no one was moving during the pandemic. The jeepneys weren't allowed to operate because of quarantine restrictions. The Sari Sari store was barely breaking even. Everything I'd invested in was dead weight. I was quite friendly with one expat named Gary, an Australian guy in his late 60s who'd been living in Cebu for over a decade. When I told him I'd put 2 condos and a house in my wife's name, I remember him just shaking his head and saying, "Mate, you're fucked if this goes south." I just didn't want to hear it, though. I told him it was different for us, that Tesselin wasn't like that we were really in love. He just looked at me and said, "They all say that." By the time late 2020 rolled around, I'd spent over $330,000 total. I had less than $170,000 left, and my monthly expenses weren't going down, they were going up. I knew I couldn't keep living like this anymore. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I tried to sit down with Tesselin and have a serious conversation about our finances. I told her we needed to cut back, that we couldn't keep spending at this rate, and that I was genuinely worried we'd run out of money before I turned 70. She listened, but she didn't really hear me. She just said, "We'll be fine, don't worry so much," and changed the subject. That's when I knew. Deep down, I knew she didn't care about the money running out because it wasn't her money to begin with. The house I paid for didn't feel like mine. The life I thought we were building didn't feel real anymore, and every day I felt more trapped. In January 2021, after the travel restrictions eased a bit, Tesselin told me she needed to go to Leyte to check on the house. She said the contractor her uncle needed to discuss some final details about the finishes, and she wanted to make sure everything was done properly. She said she'd be gone for 4 days. I stayed in Cebu. I was tired, my knees were bothering me, and honestly, I just wanted some time alone. I told her to go ahead, and she left on a Friday morning. For the first 2 days, communication was normal. She'd send me photos of the house, updates on the construction, and we'd video call in the evenings. But on the 3rd day, Sunday, I couldn't reach her at all. I called 5 times straight to voicemail. I sent messages on Viber and Messenger, no response. By Sunday night, I was frustrated and worried. I called her mother in Manila to ask if she'd heard from Tesselin. That's when things got strange, her mother said. "She's not in Leyte. She's here in Manila with us." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean she's in Manila?" She told me she was going to Leyte. There was a long pause. Then her mother said, "Oh, maybe she went there first. I don't know. Let me ask her to call you." I hung up, and my hands were shaking. Something wasn't right. An hour later, Tesselin finally called me back. Her voice was tight, defensive. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm in Leyte," she said. "I told you. Your mother said you're in Manila." Another pause. "She's confused. I'm in Leyte." I didn't believe her. I told her to send me a photo with a timestamp and a local landmark to prove it. She got angry, saying I didn't trust her, that I was being controlling. We argued for 20 minutes before she finally hung up on me. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, Monday, I decided I was going to Leyte myself to see what was really going on. I took a ferry from Cebu to Ormoc, then a bus to the small barangay where the house was located. It took me almost 7 hours. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. When I got to the property, I saw the house. It was finished mostly, but something was off. There were children's toys in the yard, a motorcycle parked outside, laundry hanging on a line. I walked up to the door and knocked. A man answered. He was in his early 30s, wearing a tank top and shorts, holding a beer. He looked at me, confused. "Can I help you?" he asked in Visayan. "I'm looking for Tesselin," I said. His face changed. He looked nervous. "She's not here. This is my house," I said. "I paid for it." He stared at me for a long moment, then called inside. A woman appeared, someone I'd never seen before. Then 2 small children, maybe 5 and 7 years old. "Who are you?" I asked the man. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I'm her husband." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "What?" "I'm Tesselin's husband. We've been married for 8 years. These are our kids." I couldn't breathe. I just stood there staring at him, at the children, at the house I'd paid $65,000 to build for a woman who already had a family I knew nothing about. The man, his name was, June, invited me inside. He wasn't angry. He seemed almost sorry for me. He told me everything. Tesselin had been married to him since 2013. They had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. They'd been living in Manila, but their relationship had been rocky. She'd been working at the call center in Cebu, sending money back to him and the kids, but they'd been fighting a lot. She told him she'd met a foreigner online who could help them financially, and June had agreed to it. He showed me photos, wedding photos, family photos, birthday parties, everything. "She told me you knew," June said quietly. "She said you were just helping her family." I sat down on the couch I'd paid for, and just stared at the floor. "Where is she?" I finally asked. "Manila, with her mother." I called her. This time, she answered immediately. "You lied to me," I said. My voice was shaking. "You've been lying to me for 4 years." She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to apologize. She just said, "I needed the money. My family needed the money. You're married. You have kids. I know. So what am I? What was any of this?" "It was real," she said, but her voice was flat. "I did care about you, but I had to take care of my family. With my money, yes." I asked her how much of what she'd told me was true. She admitted that most of the emergencies were either exaggerated or completely made up. Her mother's surgery? Real, but it only cost 40,000 pesos, not 120,000. She kept the difference. Her sister's tuition? She wasn't even in college. The business investments? The sari-sari store existed, but it was making almost nothing. The jeepney had broken down within 3 months, and she'd never fixed it. The house in Leyte? That was always meant for June and the kids. Everything I'd built, everything I'd paid for, was for her real family. I was just the foreigner who funded it. I sat in a cheap hotel in Ormoc that night and did the math. When I started in 2016, I had $500,000 saved from selling my house and cashing out my pension early. What I spent: first condo in Cebu, my name, $80,000. Second condo in Cebu, her name, $95,000. Land and house in Leyte, her name, $65,000. Monthly family support, $250 times 48 months equals $12,000. Emergency requests, $45,000. Most of it lies sari-sari store plus jeepney, $13,750. Living expenses, rent, food, travel, $48,000. Over 4 years, miscellaneous gifts, trips, her personal expenses, $22,000. Total spent, $380,750. What remained? Savings left, $119,250. Property in my name. One condo worth maybe $70,000 if I sold it quickly. Pension income, $1,100 CAD per month from Canada. What was in her name that I couldn't recover? Second condo, $95,000. Leyte house and land, $65,000. Total value she kept, $160,000. When the condos were eventually sold, the one in my name, after all the fees and the market decline during COVID, I got back about $65,000. I'd lost over $315,000 directly, and my total financial loss when you factor in the living expenses and wasted money was closer to $435,000. I'd spent 4 years of my life trusting someone who was lying to me from the very beginning, and I'd lost nearly $500,000 over and above what I should have spent if I'd just stayed single and rented a modest place in Cebu. What a nightmare it was. The fact that she wasn't even sorry that she admitted it so casually, like it was just business, that hurt more than the money. After I found out the truth, I stayed in that hotel in Ormoc for 3 days. I didn't know if I should just return to Canada immediately or try to salvage something from the wreckage. I kept thinking about the house in her name, the condo in her name, and whether there was any legal way to get any of it back. But then I realized I'd put everything in her name voluntarily. I'd signed the documents. I had no legal claim to any of it. I was 67 years old, in a foreign country, with about $120,000 left and no plan. On the 4th day, I took the ferry back to Cebu. Tesselin had returned to our rented condo by then. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, calm, like nothing had happened. She tried to explain herself. She said she'd been planning to tell me eventually, that she thought I understood the situation, that her family had needed help and I was the only one who could provide it. She even tried to hug me, saying we could still make it work, that she could visit me in Canada sometimes, that we didn't have to end everything. I just looked at her and told her it was over. I said she could keep the properties. I had no way to take them back anyway, but the marriage was done. I wanted a separation and eventually a divorce. She didn't fight me. She didn't cry. She just nodded and said, "Okay." That was it. 4 years, nearly $500,000, and it ended with, "Okay." My plan was to sell the one condo I had in my name, take whatever money I could get, and leave the Philippines as quickly as possible. I didn't want to stay in Cebu, not in the same city where I'd been humiliated. She moved out within a week. I don't know where she went. I didn't ask. The flight back to Canada felt like punishment. Not for the money I'd lost, but for all the time I'd wasted convincing myself everything was real. Back in Red Deer, I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. I didn't have a house anymore. I'd sold it to fund the Philippines dream. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, the kind of place I swore I'd never end up in. My financial situation was grim. Savings, $115,000 after selling the Cebu condo and covering moving expenses. Monthly income, $1,100 CAD from my pension. No property, no investments, no backup plan. I was 67 years old, living in a $900 month apartment and trying to survive on $1,100 a month. You can't live on that. Not really. You should be able to, but you can't. Not when rent alone takes 80% of your income. I had to go back to work. I found a part-time job doing inventory management at a hardware store, making $16 hour for 20 hours a week. It wasn't much, but it kept me from draining my savings too quickly. The anger never left me. The bitterness stayed in everything I did. I'd wake up every morning thinking about how I'd been used, how I'd ignored every warning sign, how I'd let myself believe that a 4-year-old woman actually loved a 2-year-old man for who he was. I always think back to the time I had with her. If only she'd been honest from the start, if she'd just told me she needed help for her real family and asked me to be a sponsor, maybe I would have agreed to something reasonable. But she lied. She built an entire fake life, married me while already married to someone else, and took everything I had, and I hate her for it. I hate myself more, but I hate the fact that she never saw me as a person, just as a wallet with a heartbeat. If I could do it over, I would. Never put property in someone else's name. I don't care how married you are. If you can't legally own it, don't buy it. Set firm financial boundaries from the start. $250 month for family support, maximum. Anything beyond that is a red flag. Listen when family and friends warn you. My daughter tried to tell me. Gary tried to tell me. I ignored them all. Don't ignore red flags. Unreturned phone calls, vague excuses, constant money requests. These aren't coincidences. Keep emergency money completely separate. Never let anyone know your full financial situation. Verify everything. Don't trust photos or stories. Go see things yourself. Accept that age gaps usually mean something. A 2-4-year-old doesn't fall in love with a 6-2-year-old because of his personality. I'm 70 now. I'm still working part-time, still living in the same small apartment in Red Deer, and still trying to stretch $115,000 for however many years I have left. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The fact that I still have enough to live on and haven't ended up completely destitute, that's got to be good enough for me. I know guys who lost everything, who ended up homeless or had to move back in with their kids. At least I avoided that. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. I'm still living in Red Deer, in the same one-bedroom apartment I moved into when I came back from the Philippines. It's not much worn carpet, thin walls, a view of the parking lot, but it's mine, and at least nobody's lying to me about it. My financial situation today. Savings, $108,000, down from $115,000 5 years ago due to inflation and medical expenses. Monthly income, $1,100 pension, plus $1,280 from part-time work equals $2,380 divided by month. Expenses, rent, $950, utilities, $150, food, $400, medications, $200, insurance, $180, MISC, $300, equals $2,180 divided by month net savings per month, $200. If nothing goes wrong, I started with $500,000, which would have given me $1,600 month in interest alone if I just left it in a high-interest savings account and lived modestly. Instead, I'm 70 years old, working 20 hours a week at a hardware store, and hoping my knees hold out long enough to make it to 75 when I can apply for additional government assistance. My daily life is simple. I wake up at 6 a.m., make instant coffee, and watch the news. I work Tuesday through Friday, 4-hour shifts. On weekends, I stay home. I don't have hobbies anymore. I don't travel. I don't date. I just exist. I do know now that Tesselin is still with June in Leyte. A mutual acquaintance, one of the expats from Cebu, told me he'd seen her Facebook profile. She's still in the house I paid for, raising the kids I never knew existed, living the life I funded without ever knowing it was for someone else's family. She's never tried to contact me, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to ask for more money. I'm just gone to her, like I never existed. The Philippines itself is a beautiful country, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm guaranteed that there are real and genuine people there and genuine relationships between foreigners and Filipinos. I've seen them. I know they exist. But there are also people like Tesselin who see foreign men as nothing more than financial opportunities. I'm not saying everybody's like that. In fact, I know most people aren't. But the ones who are, they're convincing. They're patient. They know exactly what to say and when to say it. And they'll take everything if you let them. I'm telling this story because I want other men out there, especially older guys thinking about retiring to Southeast Asia, to know what can happen. How easy it is to lose so much money when you think with your heart instead of your head. I didn't think I was naive. I was a grown man in my 60s. I'd been married before. I'd worked for nearly 4 decades in a technical field. I thought I knew better. But I got played right from the start just as easily as anyone else. If you see these red flags, walk away. She's unreachable for hours at a time, with weak excuses. There's always a reason. Don't accept it. Family emergencies happen every few months. Real emergencies don't follow a pattern. She pushes you to put property in her name. If she loves you, she'll understand why you can't. Her family is always in financial trouble. Poverty is real, but constant crises are engineered. She gets defensive when you ask questions. Honest people don't get angry when you verify things. Her past is vague or inconsistent. If she won't talk about her ex, her kids, or her real life, she's hiding something. Don't put property in her name. Don't believe that what's mine is yours applies when you're a foreigner in a country with strict ownership laws. Don't ignore your gut when something feels wrong. And most importantly, don't assume that because she's younger, poorer, or from a different culture, she can't manipulate you. Some of the smartest con artists I've ever encountered were women who never finished high school but understood human psychology better than any therapist. 4.5 years ago, I thought I was building a retirement dream in the Philippines. I thought I'd found someone who loved me, someone who saw past my age and my ordinary life and wanted to build something real together. 4.5 years later, I'm back in Red Deer, working part-time at 70, living in a cramped apartment, and wondering where the hell it all went wrong. I've seen so many men since 2016 go to the Philippines with all the best intentions in the world. Good men, honest men, lonely men looking for companionship, and they're the ones who end up losing everything. Because the women who target foreign men aren't amateurs. They're professionals. They know how to make you feel special, how to make you feel needed, and how to drain your bank account while making you think it was your idea. The fact that I still have $108,000 in a pension, the fact that I'm not homeless or completely destitute, that's got to be good enough for me. I compare myself to guys like Terry, an expat I met in Cebu who lost his house, his savings, and his health insurance because his Filipina wife convinced him to invest everything in a beach resort that never got built. At least I avoided that level of catastrophe. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. The Philippines was the country I'd dreamed about for years after my buddy from work first told me about it. It was a country I wanted to spend my retirement in, where I thought life would be easier, warmer, and more fulfilling. I quickly realized that the dream I'd built in my head was just that, a dream. The reality was heat, noise, constant requests for money, and a wife who was never really mine. Even after all that happened, I don't entirely regret going. I learned something about myself, about how desperate I was for connection, about how willing I was to ignore reality just to feel wanted. That's a hard lesson, but it's an important one. As for Tesselin, I hope she's at least using the money I gave her to take care of those kids. If nothing else, maybe something good came out of it. I thought I was building a future in Cebu with a woman who loved me. But what actually happened was I funded someone else's family while being lied to for 4 years. The moral of the story? Don't be so desperate for love that you ignore every warning sign in front of you. Just make better decisions if you want to do the same. You have been warned.